Then, since I'm audible and visible to everyone, hi. To introduce myself, my name is Abhivardhan, and by profession, I'm a technology lawyer, but also I run an industry forum on AI by the name of the Indian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Law. So, here my interest is to, rumble around and discuss about, you know, the kind of risks which are associated with businesses in the context of technology and geopolitics. Now, this is something interesting even from a legal standpoint because a lot of things around contracts and regulations come in. But when we look at them holistically, that gives us a larger picture how businesses should be ready. So what I'll do that I wish to make it a bit more interactive, and I apologize for being a bit late. There was some urgent engagement through which there was some delay. Let me share my screen for everyone's convenience so that I'd be in a position to show it. So I just need a minute on this. I think it should be visible now in a minute. Yeah, I'll just give it a try. Present a view. Okay, okay, now it's working. Yeah. So I think are we in a position? Yes. Sharing the screen. Optimize for text and images. Here we go. So yes, I think the screen should be visible now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pardon me if some background noise comes in, some things I can't just help. So, um, although there is none, but there might be something eerie and sharp coming up, not in my hands. Anyways, so quick introduction of mine. I am a technology lawyer, but Indo-Pacific, which is an aspect of international relations, has always intrigued me. I have contributed to insights in G20 Brazil, uh, and South Asian University, Commonwealth Legal Education Association, and certain other engagements like India Mobile Congress and many others in India and beyond. Recently, I was also quoted as a part of a report on the role of deepfakes, which are a segment of synthetic content in AI, and when it comes to the risks that they have in elections. So that's my background. I specialize in these areas. Um, but the two areas which I really love the most are Indo-Pacific studies and AI governance. But I'll not discuss a lot about AI. I'll discuss more about the intersection and one part of it, which is AI. But I'll think what will happen at the end of the discussion is once we'll discuss a few case studies, then we can actually delve into the business risk side of it, like how businesses should be prepared. Why should you be understanding this? And what I'll do is that I'll be happy to take questions because I don't wish to make it a boring lecture where we discuss and nothing comes out as an outcome, right? Something should be there either in the form of questions or Q&A. So I'm happy to take up questions. You can send it on the chat. I'll see what I can do on that. So that's definitely the way. So when we of course begin, of course there are 5 areas I wish to cover. One, of course, is cybersecurity. So when we talk about businesses, we also know very obviously that cybersecurity risks are inevitable. They just happen. Banks have these issues, insurance companies have these issues, everyone has these issues, right? I mean, hospitals like AIMS, which are government entities, had severe issues recently, and there are other government entities also who are vulnerable to it. Like there are places where you have coding infrastructure, you know it's still based on the older versions. It's not updated, and the government people are not just aware of it. So, and it could happen even in traditional businesses or long-term businesses, right? Because when you look at technology or IT, the way, because of AI or other technologies, the way reason I say AI is because the way AI creates a sense of vulnerability in cybersecurity. Like, people say Gen AI is revolutionizing. It might or might not be revolutionizing. But what's happening with generative AI is because you have these chatbots who are good, who just hallucinate and make mistakes. you are in a situation to get anything from them, any kind of information which could make a cybersecurity situation inevitable, where you could get some secretive tips or certain information that you should not, and then you can use it to hack, or maybe involve in other adversarial ways in traditional infrastructure which might not be prepared for AI, right? So beyond the commercial sense that how are you using these AI tools, there's also this element involved, which is why cybersecurity risk becomes interesting. The second part, which I am interested to discuss, is industrial policy and technological self sufficiency. Because what's happening is that now, after some time in 2022, countries decided suddenly that they want to have their own industrial policy, they want to reassess their manufacturing priorities, because of the information age we live in. What was happening was there was a whole some reliance on the services sector and the larger SaaS and IT sector. But that reliance is not going to help, because something must give in the global economy. So of course countries are concerned that, what, let's just come up with an industrial policies, maybe try in manufacturing, maybe try in semiconductors, maybe try in AI. Future might involve blockchain, but I think right now it's limited to AI and semicon. So that's why there's one section dedicated to AI and geopolitics, but I'll discuss those later. So I think we should start with this. So this is something which is sourced. I don't need to say much about it. That there have been cyber attacks, state sponsored cyber attacks on India. Uh, the surge is huge. 278% means that it's just more than double, nearly triple. And there have been IT companies, BPO companies, and they are sometimes coordinated in their own way, right? Like, you'll get spam calls, or sometimes your infrastructure is weak. Those basic issues keep happening, and this becomes a huge problem eventually, because um, we are a big country. So India is a big country, and the thing with governments is that, see, it's not about cybersecurity policy. I can even say, from a privacy point of view, I'll give you a simple example. Even if, let us say, the Aadhaar agency or the Reserve Bank of India, okay, or anyone in the government says, you know what, we are a regulator, we are a body, UIDAI, Data Protection Authority, our Reserve Bank of India, we say that you have to adhere to this. There will be some person at a very lower rung who will try to put your private details even on something called script. Sadly, that also happens, and that also could lead to cybersecurity issues, isn't it? I mean, because Aadhaar number is vulnerable. What I know is that the government of India, using the Aadhaar agency, is actually trying hard to bypass and solve the issues with third party problems. So basically what it means is that you have your Aadhaar number and those things, how to ensure that you're using it, and yet your personal information and deeply sensitive information, which is on DigiLocker or something, is actually safe and it is not affected. Somebody is not accessing your information even without DigiLocker. How to ensure that? That's a very huge challenge, which is why the government is closing down on verification side of things, that what is working and what is not working. These are the discussions which happen, and these are the measures which the government wants to take, because at least they're aware that uh, the datafication measures matter. So you see that it starts with privacy, it starts with that, and it goes to cybersecurity, a complete hardball game, right? So I just give you an example of that. Second, this example is very obvious: Chinese espionage campaigns, and I can tell you so many examples of Russian and Chinese campaigns in a very normal sense. So if you look at the way these problems come up, um, there have been significant cyber security situations. For example, I mean, the Ukraine Russia situation is known to everyone. So the Ukrainian hackers hack Russia's state media company and their court management system. So basically, they have a court document management system, right? And they do it on a very interesting day, the day when we have Vladimir Putin's birthday. So these are just symbolic things which are done. Um, uh, there are other campaigns which have been done. I mean, political campaigns are obviously there. You have all these bots on social media which are China led or Russia led, and all that happens. This happens in whether, irrespective of whosoever is in power in the US. So I think that is something which is also there. uh, but what's interesting about is that, of course, um, uh, these incidents will never end. It only shows you the way, uh, not governments, but also private entities are trying to show their leverage on certain things. For example, some incident came up that Indian hackers were responsible, allegedly, for uh, hacking a particular uh, uh, Canadian or some website, which is a Canadian government website or something like that, and then it just was washed away and something else happened. So these things keep happening. An interesting incident which is I remember is, Salt Typhoon, which is what happened was that Chinese hackers in November, they breached at least 8 telecom providers in the US, the United States, and they used it, because it was like a 2 year research. So it took them 2 years to, which is not a small time, to breach into the telecom infrastructure of one of the most powerful countries in the world, right? The United States of America. They stole the customer call data and usual things, and even sometimes the law enforcement data. Like, if you're calling the police and your law enforcement, that data is also very critical, right? Because you trust the government on that regard. So that was also a problem, and that compromised private communications, that compromised trust. Now, of course, I'll not get into the details of it because I'm not a cybersecurity person, but that is something which you all might be interested to know. Apart from that, of course, let's discuss a little bit from a business point of view, that if there should be mitigation strategies, then what's the way forward. So mitigation is possible, and after this, I think maybe I'll take some questions if there are any before I get to the second part of it. And I'll also discuss about how businesses should have a holistic approach to this. I think that is something we should discuss for this. But mitigation strategies imply that you know what you should do specifically. Now, there are multiple measures that could be done on encryption and those things, but I want to focus on some of them. So that's why I've only highlighted five of them. Uh, One which becomes important for everyone who is running a business, or who is at the maintenance chain of businesses or managerial chain of businesses, is that a lot of assets which are important and associated with you, knowledge assets as we call them in IP law, if they are in an infrastructure, digital infrastructure or whatever infrastructure it is, but mostly digital, since we are talking about digital risks, you should have security posture assessments. And I think what happens is, even in third party use, there are many third party tools you might be using. You might have some login access or password mechanisms and all those things. And sometimes we think, at a managerial level, when we have done MBA and joined something, or we have been working as a manager for 10 years, we think that what, these minor things might not matter, but that minor thing might lead to something. So sometimes basic strategies like multiple factor authentication, or keeping a keynote approach, that what, this has a pass key or something, if a security problem happens, then at least the company can safeguard it. So those aspects of third party use of technologies which are not built by your company, I think is something which we should be concerned about. uh, it is similar to how we should be acting with cloud companies. Similar things, no difference. So I think that is something we should be understanding. Second, which becomes interesting, is implementing access controls. Now, access controls works in commercial aspect for businesses as well, because as well as vulnerability aspect. Usually, in terms of vulnerabilities, what happens is that companies are in a situation to at least get negotiable responses. In sometimes companies who are hosting other vendors and all, they might not be responding well, but yes, there could be a plausibility that it happened. In a commercial sense, when it comes to access policies, it's more around, you have your data, and data is having cross-border transfer, from X to Y as a country. Are you ensuring that the company which is ensuring this cross-border transfer, are you in a negotiable position? Let's say from India, that what, your AI model or your larger technology model is using it, which is our data, which we are collecting it. Do we have a say in that? That is something which is very fundamental. I think it is not necessarily a security question, the latter which I'm talking about, but it definitely could lead to a security question, because many a times bigger companies do not reveal their policies. And I think uh, it's a government issue as well. The government should be giving leverage to negotiate, but I think businesses also should be vocal in the very basic sense from a contractual level, that are you telling me everything about access policies? Sometimes it's also about the bylaws. Like recently, I mean, this is a thing for businesses as well. If you're using Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, but imagine the situation. Like, I'll give you a basic example from social media, and then I'll come into business. The social media users always had this complaint, and this is right complaint, that meta applications like WhatsApp, Instagram, they don't have their bylaws, which is your community guidelines, very easily accessible. Same with Google, same with YouTube. You, and even as a business, you have a problem, right? Because content creators, businesses are also on YouTube or also on Google, right? Now, if you don't have access to specific bylaws or specific guidelines to understand how are they processing your data, where your data is going, what is the privacy infrastructure, how would you know? How would you, let's not talk even about suing them. How would you prepare your own entity and your own teams, right? For example, a marketing firm, or let us say a content creation studio, business, right? These are businesses. They think that, you know what, bylaws are there. Okay, we know, okay, this is the access policy. We need to be aware, and we need to take some measures so that an API endpoint or somewhere we are not affected. But that is something which we, as Indians, I think we don't have that leverage, because uh, big companies just do and go. And now it's changing. Like recently, YouTube, Meta, it came up with more transparent approaches. It said that, you know what, you can do, we have these three applications: Instagram, Facebook, four applications: Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and WhatsApp. If you're using these applications, their policies, bylaws, they will be at a unified Meta account portal. So you can now access them at a common Meta central account, something like that, there only. That's actually a welcome change from what it was doing before, right? Um, Google also has to fix it, with respect to its older products which have vulnerability, like Google Chrome, which is based on Chromium. Google Maps does not have that vulnerability, but Google Maps has other issues with respect to market dynamics, which also could lead to business risk, like misleading on certain things, minor issues, but still matter. But yeah, Google has those problems, and advertising tech also, it's an issue when it comes to citation and referencing a business's reputation. So reputational risk is also a concern, which I'll discuss in the context of AI, because it's more in the context of AI. So that's definitely there. Then, of course, encryption of sensitive data at transit and at rest is very important. I think that's very basic to talk about. Um, Penetration testing is something which is becoming important, which is why the fourth point. For example, in generative AI models, but what we have seen is that these models generally are not that good, right? And the problem is vertical scaling, not horizontal scaling. I'll give you an example. So companies will claim, in AI side or technology side, that, we have an enterprise suite. Now, an enterprise suite means you're offering multiple things, like Docs, Excel sheet, PowerPoint, but from a different company, not Microsoft. So let us say Zoho does it, or somebody does it. But then you, don't even have your basics settled. You're just horizontally providing everything, but your vertical scaling is not there. And then there could be a vulnerability problem. What would you do about it? What is the business risk? That also is amounting to how exactly have your arrangements settled with cloud companies in other countries. Suppose it's a conflict of interest between a cloud entity which is in Singapore and one is in US, and there might be not some lack of semblance. Then what will you do, right? Fortunately, if your data is not in China or not those countries, like, well, then congratulations. But of course, there are aspects of conflict which might emerge, right? And I think, from a protocol perspective, we should be aware of it. We should be prepared for it at a basic level, not at a very high level, but at a basic level. So that's why penetration testing matters, to check the vulnerability of models, check the vulnerability of infrastructure. It works in every case, not just AI. It works in every case, every IT infrastructure, CRM, and others. Especially for B2C firms. B2C firms are among the most vulnerable, easy to be affected. because not only they have a revenue issue, also they also have a huge resource connection to their customers and community. And the moment they suffer a cybersecurity issue, it could be a problem that they might lose customer trust. So that's a business risk, right? I mean, until you have a very robust approach to this, or you are prepared before, to some extent, so that's definitely one there. And the last one, which is important before I get into AI, and I will take some questions, is incident response plans. Like, if you are coming up with anything, you have a specific incident response approach. That could be just starting with emailing, like, okay, fine, this has happened, this is an automated email stating that this has happened. Or it could be a systemic approach, that, what, certain options are closed, certain things are now to default for every user in a particular CRM website, or any portal or web app or Android app or whatever it is. Are you prepared for that? At the same time, sometimes even the government will ask you, like certain cyber emergency response team, computer emergency response team, India, they might ask you, right? That, what measures have you taken? So you should be prepared to answer to the government. So auditability, right? um, I think that's a significant risk, because geopolitically things could just happen from multiple countries, and you just don't know how far this could go from a digital supply chain perspective, and from a digital value chain perspective, as well as, I would say, digital knowledge chain perspective, because data flow is there. So digital value chain, digital supply chain, and digital knowledge chain, these three things are different. Value chain is basically more around talent, people who are working, HR. Knowledge chain is about data, content, information. And supply chain is about product and services. What are you offering? What are you partnering on? Etc. Etc. Subscriptions, licenses, royalties, all of these are under supply chain. Because if your supply chain is weakened, you can't enforce your contracts. So where will you go? Keep running, right? So always remember, since you all are from business background, as I've been told by the college, um, always remember these three when you study technology and business risk together in geopolitical sense, in a basic way, that there is a digital knowledge chain, data, content, information. There's a digital value chain, and then there's a digital supply chain, in a digital sense, of course, right? In a physical sense, it's a different game altogether. So that's the one thing. But yeah, before I get into AI and geopolitics, which is one segment of it, uh, let's address questions in the chat, or if somebody has to ask something. I don't wish to keep it like a boring lecture. So does anyone have any questions, anything? Please feel free to.
Yeah, so first of all, good afternoon. Regarding the second point, implement robust access control based on user roles. It refers to the insider threat to a certain extent, right? That is to enable least privileged access to the employees of an organization. I hope I am making sense in that direction. But in those cases, also in we have seen before that we have multi-factor authentication to prevent any kind of data yeah, data breach. However, there is some you have the latest development, not the latest, one of the developments being smishing and phishing. So that's where we get the OTP, right? So in those cases, there are again high chances that employees might be fooled by the fake messages being sent by certain counterparties, and eventually it destroys the whole system from inside, right? So in those cases, how exactly can the mitigation strategies be formulated, or rather reformulated, to get those things out of the way?
So that's a great question. So I think in that regard, of course, encryption is one of the ways to secure your channels of communication. But let us assume that the channels of communication are deeply affected. The one way we see it is, of course, we have to come up with better relocation of trust based engagement, because then what happens is you are at a stage where it is completely trustless. Now, one of the measures which companies usually adopt in infrastructure like this, not a lot of companies are trying, but in India, maybe if some companies will try, is using quantum technology, quantum chips or blockchain, which is to say that when your authentication itself is based on centralized conceptions, because my MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, is a centralized idea, right? It's based on either you use a hardware, which is hardware stuff like USB and all, or you use, rely on something as a system, and then you are completely duped. There's also a thing which is known in AI and hacking, which is known as adversarial machine learning, where you enter into the system, the larger private infrastructure or public infrastructure, and your algorithm has techniques to behave as if it is doing in a very normal course. And this could also happen in stock trading. Like, I drafted a mood problem that I did for Manipal Law Bangalore. I think yours is Manipal Mangalore. So I did for Manipal Law Bangalore. And then what I actually made a problem out of was that an adversarial algorithm entered into the system, which was a fraud tracking financial tech system. It's a fintech application which was tracking financial frauds. And then what happened was, at a particular point, it failed to inform the central bank. So the lawyers, the law students, they had to figure out the legal question around it. But uh, I think that's the answer to the questions. Of course, that sometimes we need decentralized protocols. That is one of the measures which our companies are trying to take. I'm not sure many are doing it because many are not aware. And again, it's scaling and viability. That's up to blockchain companies in India. But I think communication protocols, sometimes people go a bit physical also. Certain things are completely out of digital purview. Sometimes they just go digital, but then they just divide it, like, because in a centralized system, if one is gone, then everyone is gone. But in a blockchain protocol, what happens is that in a decentralized ledger, if one is gone, then five others are left, if there are six people. So still you can have some sense of protection. But I think that's something which is a rumbling question. So glad you asked. But yeah, any other questions per se? Please, happy to.
Yeah, another question is regarding the last one. You mentioned three chains, right? Digital knowledge chain, value chain, and supply chain. So the recent in the February of this year, 2024, we had the largest healthcare data breach, which is the United Health Group data breach, and it did not come directly to the United Health Group. It rather came through an intermediary of or other subsidiary of United Health Group, which is Change Healthcare, and that led to a lot of financial losses and a lot of PII, which is patient information health. Patient health information (PHI). Sorry. In those cases, United Health Group as a company is very well secured from any kind of cyber threat because they have proper mitigation strategies in place. Whereas subsidiaries, such as the Change Healthcare, did not have, and that's the reason hackers found out that loophole. A lot of time companies don't recognize that they have a subsidiaries and recognize the importance of them having the security measures in place. So this is one of the biggest problems which big conglomerates face, right, in this current scenario. You as a company might be completely secure, but your supply chain is not completely secure. So in those cases, how do we get those rectified? Because a lot of time you don't recognize that particular part of your business to be very important, but all of a sudden it becomes one of the biggest loopholes in a business. So that is one thing which we have to tackle, right? And what could be one of the ways to tackle those?
So one of the ways I see it, that first of all, settle this way before in your contractual approaches. I think it has to be done. There is no other way to this. I'll give you an example. For example, in the Indian data protection law, which was passed last year in August, uh, if you are collecting data yourself, uh, and not through a third party, let us say, then you are liable and you have certain rights as well as certain duties. You have certain things which you have to follow. You are liable to do that, or you will be sued very well, and the data protection authority can take action. But the funniest part, if you're a data fiduciary, which is a data principle in the European GDPR language, you are gonna be responsible. But if somebody is also who's processing, also a third party data processor, that entity is also liable. In the Indian case, it is not. So now you have to have a contract with the data processing entity, let us say in the supply chain, and say, you know what, boss, you have to agree to these conditions. You have to agree that you will recover, you will agree on the recovery cost provisions of the, so the terms of the contract. And this is something which is important because uh, if this is not something which is taken care of, I think trust in the digital supply chain is gone. So that is one. It could also be done by virtue of a smart contract, which is a blockchain based measure, where certain segments of the systems which are subject to more vulnerability, where PIIs are involved, maybe some interlinking and interlinking agreement could happen. I'm just suggesting this, but I think start with contracts. Number one, and within that, focus on cybersecurity management measures. What kind of ISO approved and IEEE approved, maybe, cybersecurity measures are being taken up? That's actually very basic, and I think a business has a right to ask that. I think that way, on restoring systems, getting data back or not, or what is the next measure, at least this could be very helpful. And yeah, I think there should be an aspect of online dispute resolution, because if it's a company, then you're not going to go to New York or Singapore for filing it. So yeah, that's what I say as a lawyer. But yeah, any other questions in that regard? No questions? Sure. Okay, cool. I hope I did not bore. But yeah, so as you can see the screen, this is second part before we get into AI, and that is like industrial policy. So industrial policy is more around, like, as I told you in the beginning, what happened was that governments were more obsessing around digital services because of ICTs, and now the new term has come of ICETs, which is information, new, basically critical and emerging technologies, but in a sense that communication and emerging technology, something like that. Countries just keep mixing it, whether it is the Quad grouping, Indo-Pacific Quad, or beyond. So, with respect to information technologies, which are critical and emerging, AI, of course, is one of them, but there are others as well, like semiconductor chips. Now, what is that governments decided that they can't over rely on Taiwan and China for most of the chip development. Now, the chip development itself, packaging and other measures, and a caveat that I'm giving, when while I discuss about industrial policy, I'm not somebody who's an expert in IP law when it comes to semiconductors, because there's a specific category in IP law which is known as integrated circuits. That is something which we as lawyers don't deal with, because it's just a very lock-in situation. It's like the karigari in Rajasthan or something like that. Like, only the artists know, sometimes only they can interpret. So it's like that. So if I'm asked about semiconductor chips or something, I'll just deny that. But rest I can, of course, discuss about industrial policy from a trade secret and other points of view. So that's a caveat I give. But what is understandable is that industrial policies are now focusing on manufacturing capabilities, and how relevant it becomes. Uh, for that reason, of course, semiconductor policy is important, because in the case of China, we see that they are focusing on Made in China 2025, because they also want to less over rely on Taiwan, because not of reason that Taiwan could be quote unquote invaded someday. We don't know that. Like, it's a security strategy scenario. The Americans may try to a bit, you know, arouse them, or something might be the case. But I think even the Chinese are not necessarily interested in it. But of course, if they have to do it someday, they'll do it. That is something they are very clear about. So everyone is concerned. Okay, India is concerned, because we are still finalizing on packaging, and we just don't want to become another country of assembly, right? Um, so I'll get on PLI initiatives. Um, but the good part is that, of course, that what we see with China is that uh, they promote these policies to disrupt this chain, because they don't want to rely on Taiwan. And their lack of relying on Taiwan is also understandable why they wish to do that. Because uh, again, they also know that Taiwan is vulnerable, and Europe, US also rely on it. So they want to shift that pivot completely to them, right? Um, Now, that's why countries are focusing on some 3 to 4 aspects when it comes to core industrial policy changes. Number one, they're focusing on national security by promoting self-sufficiency. That's something we even a debate in India. For example, if I refer to the semiconductor mission, let me share. Let me change the yeah yeah. If I refer to the semiconductor mission, so one thing we see is that the India AI mission, currently led by Additional Secretary of MATI, which is Abhishek Singh, very nice man. Um, they are focusing on having semiconductor plants for both commercial and security purposes. One of them, as I know, it's already in going to happen in Uttar Pradesh. Uh, there are some which are happening in Gujarat. Gujarat and Gift City are giving absolutely great competition to Tamil Nadu and even Karnataka. So Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, to an extent Noida and Uttar Pradesh, and these places in Guwahati, because Tatas are also trying. Uh, there's some attempt so that some self-sufficiency is achieved. But I think for India, it will still take time, because despite all the good efforts and despite all the thinking, and there's a sense of guilt also. The government realizes that for 30 years they completely ignored chips. It's not that they were not building it, but they were not building enough, and they were just nearly nothing. Like, so many cycles have passed that sometimes, for a country like India, industrial policy completely has to be absolutely new about innovation. Like, you either you innovate or you innovate in the supply chain infrastructure. You have to do something. Second aspect, which is a new thing in industrial policy, which I think, is that want to support job rich and inclusive growth, so that you have a segment of population which is able to contribute in taxation or other things and other aspects of economy, thereby creating national champions. Okay, and that you can do through companies, of course, through unicorns in India, not just the Zomatos of the world, but even companies like Zoho and others, which are national champions of sort. Then, of course, there's also an attempt that, so there's a concept called Brazilianization. Brazilianization. So Brazilianization is referring to the country of Brazil, and why is it important? Is important to know from economic sense. So what happens is that the middle income trap is something which is something China is known for. But when you look at Brazilianization from a perspective of a Latin American country like Brazil, what happens is that they are suffering from economic disparity and income inequality. And it's not necessarily a K-shaped situation. It's more like the stable employment patterns which countries used to have, because of the, I would say, the very excessive economic interventions without caring about the larger talent base and the larger people who are working. There's no stable employment pattern. You just don't have job security anymore for years. And it's also not creating a sustainable condition for businesses to even thrive. So that affects things. People are also taking more informal jobs for that matter. Like, to an extent it is happening in India, but again, the problem with India is very different. It's more like we still have a lot of inclusion aspects which we have to do. Like, with, if you see direct benefit cash transfer, the benefit with that is that the government of India, RBI, and the banks, they get a lot of information on how many people are in the BPL, below poverty line category, how many people are in a possibility to become the next middle class. Now, these things actually affect, because suppose they want to go for Startup India schemes or something like that, they want to get some grants under Mudra. Yes, it does show that if you are not preparing them well, if you're not offering them a suitable infrastructure for business sustainability, even at a best basic level, let us say ideation and prototyping stage, then or let us say chalo pre-production stage, then I think you can't create national champions or emerging national champions, let us say. So I think that's what also is somehow indirectly a concern in the semiconductor mission, but that's a general concern I've shown for the larger reasons why government is concerned about business. But I think they have to work hard on it. But coming back to semiconductor mission, of course, they have the PLI scheme, which works in multiple aspects like mobile phones and others. Um, One suggestion they had, the government, that's what I know from Ministry of Information Broadcasting, is that they wanted to have production linked incentive in the gaming sector. But that was like primarily for IP generation. But I don't know how that works for industrial policy, because that technically means you are into R&D, right? Research and development. So That's a bit of a conflict of thing. But rest, if you see, when you see mobiles like iPhones, uh, that's a completely different story. So the semiconductor mission itself offers incentives. GCC policies there, ITES policies there in Uttar Pradesh and other governments. So that's of course one attempt. Apart from that, of course, we have South Korea. We have their own semiconductor belt initiative. Uh, they more focus on the R&D side of things, which is why they want collaboration between academia and industry. That's interesting. I think we should do in, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 10 times more in India, where state governments actually engage with academic partners and industry partners. They also invite NRIs and others. You know what, bro? Come to us. We'll give you the space. You research, and we create IPs out of it. Investment happens, and if state governments do it right, it could be possible. For example, I'll give you a sob story, but it's something about business realities. So somebody in Bihar, see, ironically, like in Uttar Pradesh, it's still easy to do. I mean, you can still do. The only issue in Uttar Pradesh is more around electricity, commercial aspects of providing electricity. But in Bihar, a guy actually tried to open a semiconductor company. And when it comes to general protection from police or general security, general industrial help which you need, when it comes to electricity and other supplies, the government doesn't understand. And he literally gave up and wrote about it, a long thread on X, that is Twitter. I'm like, see, a lot of national capabilities in India also, for example, or any other country, are based on state capabilities, right? If the United States is able to usher its strength, it's not just because of California and San Francisco, it's also because of Texas, right? Well, one is a blue state, one is a red state. So I think national champions will come from tier 2, tier 3 cities as well. But I think if governments are focusing on that, I think state governments also need to open up and realize and learn better. I think most of the state governments in India are not understanding it, except some of them, like Tamil Nadu is brilliant in this. It's a manufacturing powerhouse. Gujarat is great. It understands businesses very well. It has its issues. It has its issues, but it understands very well. Much better than Uttar Pradesh, much better than others. Even Delhi NCR. Delhi NCR, it's a deadlock issue sometimes with, but Haryana is trying to understand. So that's definitely there. So before this, of course, any question on the industrial policy side before I get into AI and the regulation aspect of how it affects businesses, but any questions on the industrial policy side? Really curious if anyone
Yeah.
has any.
Couldn't understand the Brazilianization part which you were explaining. So what exactly was it? How did you exactly relate it to the middle income part? I did not understand the entire part of that. So yeah.
No, so the reference to middle income was more around the China people who are in China, their incomes be stuck. But the direct reference was not more to middle income, it was more to say that your incomes get stagnated. But in the case of Brazilianization, my reference was more around the question of not having stable employment patterns. Not, and your work arrangements get precarious because a lot of because of the way the economy is in a situation, because Brazil's economic history is weird. It has its own, it's like a sine wave. So it has its own economic boom, then it has its own I would say stagflations if necessary, or at least stagnation. And that has and this is tied to commodity exports, because and this could even happen in Southeast Asian countries, but I'm not sure if that's the case right now. But in the case of Brazil, since they have been largely tied to commodity exports in that sense, it has created persistent economic insecurity, which is why people are taking up multiple jobs. So, because of their job security issues, job security is dying. It's declining in Brazil very fast, and that's the thing. So the direct reference was not about middle income, it was more around the aspect that incomes sometimes don't grow. It was more around that aspect, not necessarily directly related to middle income. But that's what Brazilianization is. It's like you're hustling basically too much, and yet it's not working out. So that itself creates a process of social and economic change in Brazil, which is a bit sad to see. So yeah, any other questions, person?
Yeah, another question is that we know India is currently still a largely a service driven economy, service sector driven economy. So, as
Yeah.
per what I can understand, and relating your this particular concept to the three types of value, three types of change you taught about digital value or digital knowledge, digital supply. So, if you're a service economy, which are the though I guess from my understanding, I will concentrate more on the digital knowledge chain and the digital value chain. Perhaps not a lot on the digital supply chain, right? Yeah. So if
With
India turns out to be a manufacturing driven economy, so in those cases, we'll have to lay emphasis on all the three types of chain, right? Digital chains, right?
naturally, naturally, I don't see why should we not like. Um, uh, there will be network effects which are unstoppable. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Sometimes when you become a manufacturing powerhouse, you can also entail in part to the service economy. Or if you're a company like Tata's, or to an extent even Infosys, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes they also ensure in building other campuses for people who could be helping in the manufacturing side of things. So it's actually a network effect thing, right? Eventually, no government can stop that. So yes, like for example, Tech Mahindra has its components a lot in the service side, but they also have the automobile sector, right? Automobile segment, right? So in a complementary sense, both can benefit each other. We just don't know how, but sometimes it does. So that's what even Ola is trying to do. It's trying to leverage in EVs. It's trying to leverage through Krutrim, which is questionable as an AI model, and they're trying to create their own cloud as opposed to Azure. So I think emphasis should be on all three of them, um, because maybe IPs and maybe trade secrets and designs, that will be a very huge I would say huge component to be considered. Uh, but if I have to say, in these three, which are more important, then I think it would be a bit more around value when knowledge gets a bit more settled. So a digital knowledge chain will matter, but I think digital value chain will also matter. So I think maybe that's one thing, because that will drive the third, which is digital supply chain. So yeah. Any other questions? Happy to, before I get into AI. No questions at the moment. Okay, great. Now I'll discuss about AI. Now AI, when I keep some context on it, of course, it is something which is the most interesting, I would say, topic for me. Not just because it's something which is trending these 2 years, but also because I've drafted a whole AI regulation bill for this, for an Indian context, to get feedback from businesses and technology professionals. So that's basically AIAct.in. You can look at that. But when I drafted that bill, I was actually considering the regulation race and the innovation race which is happening. And interestingly, when we say the word value chain, even within the digital and tech value chain, the AI value chain itself is a word which is defined by the European Union in their AI Act. And that matters a lot because the European Union has a very, very deepened approach, which is very restrictive in its own way. But sometimes value chains are around contracts, sustainable measures, access policies, also cross-border data flow, and yeah, it's also about government bodies. I'll give you an example. So these days, what's happening in AI in India is also, apart from the India AI initiative, is that state governments are trying to do these boot camps and workshops. Like in Uttar Pradesh, it happened. In certain states, it happened. Haryana, it's being tried. Rajasthan, it's being tried. Maybe. But in Uttar Pradesh, at least, what happened was the state government, they actually had a boot camp to understand the third party use of AI, like what kind of AI tools they can use in their offices, third party, fourth party. Now, we are a country where even our judges, and judges are important people, okay? I mean, if a judgment is coming up and the judicial infrastructure is manipulated in a way that a judge is not able to give a judgment freely because some of their private information, some confidential information given to them for, clients give them, right? counsel give them, advocates give that, and the judge has to keep them in their folder or something digitally, and somehow that is hacked, then what will a judge do? A judge will be subject to vulnerability, and also a lack of credibility comes in because the judge is there, right? What we expect from a court master or a judge in a court. So see, even these vulnerability issues come up. So in that regard, of course, what can be seen is that third party use of AI is inevitable in this country. It is happening at a rapid pace. Everyone is doing it. Thanks to ChatGPT, I think about 60 plus percent users in the world of ChatGPT free version are Indians. And the number will only increase. I think it will be 70% or 80% very soon. I don't know. Um, at least the Chinese are not doing it. They might be doing it through dark web, but through other models easily. But they have better models than ChatGPT. But Indians, of course, are using it, right? We are using it for itinerary making. We are using for contract drafting. Like, people are assuming that it will work. But what about putting some private information in the contract? That gets hallucinated by the system. And then you need guardrails for it to at least check from a security. I think that the primary regulatory risk with AI is actually about cybersecurity, at least in the context of Gen AI. Intellectual property, those things are commercial law. But of course, geopolitics has a role to play there. Because again, we are not at a level where it gets very tense in international trade bodies. But what we see in US and China also, like I talked about Uttar Pradesh, that they're understanding third party use. The Americans and the Chinese. So Americans, what they are doing is that the Biden administration, and this is one great thing they did. But I don't think Trump will be able to undo the measure completely. So the Biden administration comes up with a executive order. They say that these are XYZ departments: Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Agriculture, blah, blah, blah. These departments will have to tell us in 6 months and or 9 months what are they using when it comes to the AI tools. What is the red teaming measure? Because that is fundamentally necessary. Even in the Seoul summit, Seoul AI summit, which was a follow up to the Bletchley summit, red teaming measures have been emphasized very seriously. So, red teaming is a necessity across these departments, because bilaterally, I'll tell you, Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Jaishankar and the guy who will be Secretary of State will have very good relations. But somebody in Department of Defense or somebody in, I'm not saying Department of Defense, let's say it's too high to say, not saying Pentagon. Let us say somebody in some random department in the state, in the larger US government, some middle level employee, if they don't have their red teaming measures prepared with respect to AI use, because AI involves two things: automation and augmentation. If you don't do that, you will be stuck in a situation where bilaterally it's all going good at a higher level, but at some level of cooperation between somebody in the computer emergency response team or somebody in a ministry in government of India or state government and that US guy if necessary, with of course somebody from foreign affairs, which is external affairs, because the rule in India is that constitutionally only the external affairs ministry can handle this. So let us say state government official plus somebody in external affairs coordinating with a US department guy, I don't know, whatever it is, telecom or whatever. And then that particular American government official at middle level is not cooperating enough. What will you do about that? So cooperation measures are also necessary in geopolitics. Somebody at a lower level in immigration or somewhere will cause issues if they are using certain AI tools which are causing problems. So I think they have to justify their measures, and I think that is something which becomes necessary, which is what the American government is trying to do. I don't think that even if the Trump administration scraps the executive order, they can't do anything because the measures have already been implemented. So, and I think from an AI safety point of view, the US government is actually too big for the larger population. In India, it's the reverse. In India, the UPSC is a what I can say, but the thing with the Union Public Service Commission is they have to expand their vacancies now, right? Because you don't have enough bureaucrats at a lot of levels, whether it is municipal government or state government. So even police forces, that's the thing which has been debated for years in India. So that's the paradox. So if the US government is already ready because the Biden administration received a document about this. In India, we don't have that yet. So, and with China, the thing which you should know is that China is implementing specific laws based on a government ideology, which is Confucianism and Xi Jinping's own ideology and socialism and all. But that's what the interesting part with Chinese ideology is, that their algorithms, whether it is case law management in courts, whether it is the TikTok algorithm, which is a very significant, robust recommendation algorithm, not a Gen AI algorithm. Those two things are very different. They actually have so much data because China literally owns data and algorithm. That's the plain way I say it. Legally they do. They have so much restrictive measures. Any law firm which is working in China will tell you that they literally own it. They say ideology and those things, but that's because they have a very sophisticated understanding within that ideological framework that these data sets will do it this way. That's why they have a government algorithm filing systems. They're focusing on deep fakes and generative AI and fake news issues when it comes to recommendation algorithms and social media. They're very sensitive about it. So that's what the Chinese approach is. Uh, Between that, of course, these two aspects come in since we're talking about international relations. One is, of course, about privacy, intellectual property, copyright issues, and I don't want to get into that because it's just sometimes too legal-ish. And I don't want to get into those fantasy questions at all. Will AI be an inventor? Why then? That's an IP law question, but it's not easy to solve. But military, I'll get into, like when it comes to civil aviation, like aircrafts or missiles. If you're taking certain measures, you're involving AI and smart contracts. You're automating something. You're augmenting something. Are you ensuring that the measures that the AI system is doing, there are specific guardrails at a particular moment? Are you prepared for it? Have you done some training on it? I think that will be always a concern for the military, which is why Anduril and OpenAI have their partnerships recently. You can look at that. But I think since time is also of the essence, and I think we have only 10 minutes left, I think um, I'll just show these case studies quickly about reputational risk, where there are two case studies I've just referred. One is this IBM Watson for oncology. Oncology is basically for cancer treatment. And this was an AI system which was being used for cancer treatment recommendations. Now, why did it fail? It failed because the synthetic data, artificial data that they created, because usually governments prefer the use of synthetic data over original or personal information or private information, right? Which is human created, human based. It could be videos also. In the video sector also, it's the thing, graphics. But sometimes, there's a garbage in garbage out situation, but synthetic data doesn't have quality. So it could be a situation that lack of quality could lead to a problem where the outputs are actually regurgitated. And when the machine learning algorithms completely fail in that sense, unlearning that process itself is very hard. This has been recognized even in the Seoul AI Summit report. I'm not making this up. It's actually in that summit report as well. So I'm saying what is factual. Um, so it happened with patient data. It was real world patient data. This happens a lot in the health sector. Actually, people are trying a lot de-anonymizing data and all that. There's a lot of debate in India as well. But that led to unsafe treatment recommendations. That so it shows you that the fundamentals around data use, synthetic data use, is something which also affects us. And that also affects us in deepfake tracking. Like sometimes it becomes completely impossible to track what is a deep fake anymore. Sometimes, not all the time. So that's one case study. And second one is actually about a home buying algorithm. It's basically kind of like an Airbnb situation, but except that Airbnb is not here. So what happens is that you have a home buying algorithm which encountered issues. prices were overestimated. Sometimes this happens in travel apps as well in India, and eventually it has also been an issue with the food delivery apps in India. Zomato already has made it very clear before that it uses recommendation algorithms. I don't know if they use Gen AI in their chatbot, which is again a questionable thing because you're just giving that data of information to OpenAI. Why am I saying this? Because it is written that they give it to Microsoft and OpenAI. It literally say that. So that's very weird. But anyways, let Zomato do what they do. Main concern is that the recommendation algorithm actually is very interesting. So here what happened was that overestimating home prices actually led to inflated purchasing, and when reselling was happening, it was not at par with the real estate figures, right? um, it's like mortgage crisis which happened in the US. So that led to layoffs. 25% of the workforce had to leave. So that of course happened, and this of course is a thing. But since I've discussed about reputational risk and regulation, I'm more than happy to take questions on these two segments. So please, I think, how much time do we have, by the way? I think it's 1 hour 15 minutes, if I'm right, the total session. Yeah. So no questions on the AI front. Any questions? Anything to ask? Anyone, please feel free to. Okay. Sure. Okay. So in that regard, if there's no question around the risk per se with respect to use of AI in geopolitics, it's perfectly fine. So to effectively conclude on this, the one aspect which we should be aware is, I think we have discussed it already, that sometimes businesses need to take extensive measures and sometimes they need to be on a task force mode so that they are understanding what scenarios could happen, which is why I believe proactive risk management is necessary. It is the future. And I think this is something which will be contextual also for certain sectors, for the way supply chain works. I think even in the case of AI, where AI involvement is just omnipresent everywhere, which is why I covered AI, not because I specialize in AI governance. I think uh, the proactivity itself, you know, is as necessary. Also, at some level, capability planning is necessary. So I think we should be aware that at what managerial level and entry level people are capable and for what. I think that is also fundamentally necessary. So that's how it is. But yeah, any questions on the AI side, which I discussed? Any questions in general? Happy to take that up. Yeah.
You mentioned about the China Zillow case, right? The AI China Zillow case in 2021. So, regarding, as far as I can recall, there was a real estate crisis back in 2021 in China by Evergrande, or one of the largest real estate infrastructure providers. So, is that related to this particular case, or is it completely a different one?
No, so no, so the Zillow case is separate to an extent, not necessarily related. But yeah, uh, we can say from a consequence point of view, the Evergrande case was more around existing properties and its own crisis. Because on the AI component side of it, it was not. So it's been, I mean, it can be related from a larger point of view because both of them were real estate related crises. But if you look at from an AI standpoint, no, I think Evergrande was like a long term issue with respect to larger human related real estate dynamics than, you know. But yeah, but they have some very interesting parallels. That's what I can say. Yeah. Any other questions, please? Happy to address them. But yeah, it was fun that some people ask questions, I think. But yeah, happy to address any questions if there are any. No questions. Okay. I think it's already I it's already time now. So if there's any feedback or anything you'd like to give, that's of course up to you. But I hope that this session was intriguing from a discussion standpoint. Maybe, you know, maybe a bit could have been unraveled, but I hope that the things which I shared were helpful. But yeah, of course, I am reachable on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to take the discussion forward on certain things, or you are interested in what we do, of course you can find me. I'll just write about it. So and of course find me on my website. If you're interested in the AI bill I talked about a bit, of course you can find it. So I've written in the chat. You can see that. Uh, so I think my timing is nearly done. I was told that a faculty member would also be there for coordinating a bit, but I think it's done. So I think, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Harshita. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes,